Everybody, and welcome back to the Popular Music Books in Process series, a joint project of IASPM US, the Journal of Popular Music Studies, and the Pop Conference. I'm Alex Veazey, one of the series organizers, along with Antonia Randolph, Elena Razlikova, Gus Statler, Eric Weisbard, and Carl Wilson, as well as Kimberly Mack and Francesca Royster, who are currently on sabbatical. You can catch up on videos of all of our past sessions on Eric's YouTube channel, including our last session with Ben Tausig, Elliot Powell, and Kanjana Thipborirut, about Ben's new book, Bangkok After Dark, Maurice Rocco, Transnational Nightlife, and the Making of Cold War Intimacies. But this is our last Popular Music Books in Process event of the year, and we're ending things on a high note with Pete Crighton and Carolyn Taylor. Let me give you some quick background on today's presenters. Pete Crighton is a Toronto-based freelance writer and record collector with two books coming out in 2025: The Vinyl Diaries, Sex, Deep Cuts, and My Soundtrack to Queer Joy, which Penguin Random House Canada released earlier this month, and an entry in the popular 33 1/3 series on the B-52's Cosmic Thing for Bloomsbury this September. His work has appeared in the West End Phoenix, queerty.com, and he has articles coming to the Globe and Mail and Toronto Star this summer. Carolyn Taylor is an award-winning comedian, actor, writer, and showrunner. She is one of the creators, executive producers, and stars of the hit comedy Baroness von Sketch Show, CBC IFC. Most recently, Carolyn created and starred in the hit Quixotic figure skating docu-comedy I Have Nothing on Crave and Peacock, for which she received a 2024 Canadian Screen Award nomination for Best Lead Performance in a Comedy. Pete's book, The Vinyl Diaries, Sex, Deep Cuts, and My Soundtrack to Queer Joy, is a memoir about Pete's record collection, queer sex, and what growing up in the shadow of HIV and AIDS did to him as a gay man. Each chapter is named after a song, and his record collection acts as a device to share stories about his own life interconnected with artists' work and histories. The Vinyl Diaries is a hybrid of music fandom, critique, and queer theory. It explores how records become totems and storytelling devices between friends, lovers, and generations. And in March of 2019, Carolyn invited Pete to an album residency she was hosting over 18 days at the Bat House studio. Alongside the album recording, Pete wrote and explored what would become the Vinyl Diaries. And during this residency, Pete recorded a 16-minute improvised jam with the band to an Adam Ant story. And 6 years later, both Pete's book and Carolyn's album, the untitled Carolyn Taylor Project, are finally being released. And during this conversation, Pete and Carolyn will talk about the genesis and ideas in his book and the influences writers, musicians, and fellow artists have had on each other's work. And during their conversation, please post your questions as you think of them in the chat. And in the last part of the session, Antonia Randolph will call on you to unmute and ask those questions during the Q&A. And of course, we also encourage you to use the chat for comments and conversation during their conversation, but we also ask that Pete and Carolyn refrain from looking at the chat during their talk with one another. And so without any further ado, take it away, Pete and Carolyn.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. That is quite an intro. I just put together a little quick slide presentation just to get everyone sort of around where my head was going when I was writing this book. So bear with me. It's only about 8 or 9 slides, but it gives a little background. And then Carolyn and I will just jump into it and start our conversation. We did try some audio testing before you all joined us on the thing, and it is just not working, which is really a bummer. So we're going to do our best to describe what psychedelic witch pop sounds like, or queer witch pop. Sorry. So that'll be an interesting part of the conversation. So I'll run through this pretty quickly, but thank you so much for having me today. We're so thrilled to talk about my book and our relationship as artists together. Alex gave a great pitch, but really it is a love letter to my record collection, queer sex, and looking at what HIV and AIDS did to me. And it's really my story. No one else could tell this story. It's using the music I love and my record collection to tell it. And it's really, I think it's sexy. People tell me it's sexy. It's fun, I think. And it's really unlike anything that I've seen in the marketplace or anyone has read before, as far as I know. Each chapter is named after a song, and that sort of often provides a launching point to talk about an artist or album that's important to me. It is a really interesting blend of memoir, music history, and critique, and kind of a sex journal. It's really honest. It's really raw. There are dozens of lovers and albums and artists all tied to key milestones in my life. And some of the key themes that people are really jumping out and thinking about are obviously music and record collecting, gay sex and connection is important, but people really resonate with self-discovery and queer joy, and it took me a long, 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 long time to find that. The intergenerational mentorships between sort of lovers and friends within the queer community, especially, is really jumping out in some of the conversations I've had. And HIV/AIDS drama lives large, but the friendships between queer men and queer women, which ours is one of them, is something we don't see a lot of and people don't talk about. And so that was something I really wanted to highlight in the work. Um, and fascinating to me, we're getting a lot of attention from the comedic world, from people like May, from great writers like Jordan Tannehill. And Kevin Drew gave this great blurb for my book, but the first one he wrote was like, I should have tried harder to be gay, was his ultimate story for me. Um, when I was thinking about writing this thing, and my whole life has been soundtrack to music, and I sort of think of it as like the DNA coil that runs through me. And you can see up on the top left of the screen, that is actually me at a Tears for Fears show in 1985. Me at LAX airport, my first trip outside of Canada, buying Adam and the Ants posters. And all of that was backgrounded by AIDS information. I was kind of finally coming to terms with I might be gay, and the world was just collapsing. There were just all of a sudden gay men were everywhere and they were all dying. And as I got older, I sort of went into this monogamous world to just try to avoid all of that. But what broke open this book was hanging out with my friend Carolyn, and there you see us at our Dolly Parton concert. But hanging out with all these different men, playing them records from my collection, and having these conversations about me, about the music, about what it was like growing up in the 80s and 90s, backdropped by HIV/AIDS, and then sort of finding the queer joy through my relationships with my friends, but also with all of these various lovers. Um, I had a great picture of them all, but I forgot that this was going on YouTube. They all gave me permission to be in the book, but I don't know about putting the pictures online. So all of these things were happening to me around these men and sharing the music, some of which is on this screen. And, I would call Carolyn all the time and be like, holy shit, man, you will not believe what happened to me. And her constant note back to me was, write it down, just write it all down. And so that was me. I spent scribbled in my journals. I have like 7 or 8 of full moleskins of these stories, and I would have listed like, oh, we listened to Adam and the Ants, then Aretha Franklin, then Dolly Parton, and that kind of became this connective tissue for the work. Am I sharing the presentation?
This is the thing. It's, when it's like,
Oh my
to say
God.
something. It's the slides are not coming up. So, but it's been a
Okay,
great, it's been beautiful oh, here we go. All right.
Here we go,
here we
Ben.
go.
Here we go. We're back.
Okay.
This is great.
I'm just going back here so everyone can see me at the Tears for Fears concert in 1985 in the top left, and me at LAX with my Adam and the Ants poster that I still have, just FYI, and is a bit of a backdrop to our friendship.
Great. Love it.
Now,
Yeah.
as I was writing all these stories, Carolyn and I had this dream. And this is out of her journal, a picture of what I was calling the book at the time, my mixtape. Her, you can sort of see Untitled Carolyn Taylor Project written in the center of that disc. And that's me, Carolyn, and her band Mints playing Adamant. So we're not entirely sure when this was drawn, but sometime 5 years ago, 10 years ago, within that range. And when Alex talked about us going to the Bat House, and the Bat House is a really famous studio in Canada. It's Tragically Hip still owns it. And some amazing artists have passed through there. So Carolyn getting it for 18 days was this amazing coup. And it just is such a tricked out space. It just is creative energy everywhere. And so while she was off making music, I was often off in the corner, like with my journals and my computer. And that sort of sketch is actually me drawing and charting out like timelines and like this guy happened this time and these are the records, and sort of just trying to create a structure for myself to write this book. And that was like just over 6 years now. I'm going to skip over the next slide because the audio just doesn't work. But we created one track together. Oh God, there's one more slide here. This is the realized dream. Where my book came out May 13th, a couple of weeks ago. The record comes out September 22nd, 2025. And it's a double album of amazing music we're going to talk about. And then May 5th was my book launch in Toronto at Lula Lounge, and that's us playing the Adamant story that also appears on Carolyn's album. So it's sort of like this weird, witchy full circle thing we've been dreaming about for many years, and we're actually finally bringing it to realization in 2025. So we'll skip over the collaboration because it doesn't play, but we're going to try to troubleshoot with Alex a way to share it, whether it's just an attached MP3 when the recap goes out or a link somewhere online. And we'll see if we can't play it for you guys because it's pretty incredible. And then, much to my surprise, it came out a couple of weeks ago, and the reception's been amazing. Penguin really put some support into it. It's available worldwide, but all of their efforts were pushed into Canada. And because it's such a weird blend, I sort of amazed myself by landing at the top of the music history and criticism chart, but also the LGBTQ plus studies chart. And that time has passed. It was a really exciting week, but that's kind of all over. But it's really amazing to see it in the world and in conversation with books like Nico Stratus is in stores beside like Oasis books. It's just sort of this weird thing to me, which I'm loving. And that's kind of the gist. And we're going to stop sharing. Should have started earlier, but that's okay. And Carolyn and I are going to have a chat and talk about the process and talk about the book and how our two projects sort of overlap and influence each other.
Oh, cool. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks for having us. Pete, it's so strange because we're going to talk about the book. Of course, we've been friends for 30 or 25, 30 years, something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure what I remember from the book and what I remember from our conversation. So if I leap into something that's not there, apologies. But I think to know you is to know your vinyl collection, right? Like this is just part of you. It's been with you forever. It continues to grow. If I'm ever given a gift, it's usually a piece of vinyl from you. And introducing our friend group to new music. When did you realize that your vinyl collection was going to make you such a sex magnet? Like when did that turn?
Never. It was not something that I had ever anticipated would be a thing that would actually help me in that regard. I think there's a line in the book where I actually do make a joke. It's like, when my parents were asking me when I was 15 years old, like, why are you wasting all your money on records? Is like the last answer any of us was expected was to get laid when I was 45 years old. Like that, no. So that came as a complete surprise to me.
And I love just speaking of 15-year old one of the sort of hallmarks of your book is this idea of memory and our relationship to memory and trying to hold the past and the present. And it's so wild when those two worlds come together in such a real way and through music. So like, for example, Adamant, you talk about going to see, the Adamant concert when you were like 13 years old and you're closeted. You don't even know you're gay. You just know you want the man in leather pants. And what is this fucking madness on stage at the concert? And then cut to whenever it was like 20, whatever, was it 16, 17, 18, something like that?
I think 17, yeah.
17, yeah. You're at Adamant again. This time you're out, you've got this young hot lover and you're standing there. So there's like two yous coexisting, right? And this happens a few times in the book where you talk about these two yous. Like, how do you hold that? Is there, when you're seeing a concert now, how does the music traverse this sort of trans-temporal journey and sense of memory with you?
Yeah, it's really wild. I think, the Adamant is a great example, and unfortunately that was the track we were going to play. But it's so, music for me is such a sensual thing. Like it takes me back and I see so much of where I was and what I was wearing and what it felt like in those moments. And so, being at that Adamant concert in 2017 is like I felt all of that 13-year-old me at that first concert. I was in the very last row of Massey Hall. I was bumping into the lighting guy who was shining the spotlight on a man. And I remember feeling the heat from the spotlight and the noise of the crowd. Like it just is such a sensory thing for me.
Mhm.
And so many of those moments are like that in my life, where it's just like all of that comes and lands in my present. And I think that's how writing those stories of like connecting past and present and myself in those two places kind of worked in a really weird way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. You did it again when you were talking about Tears for Fears in the 80s.
Yeah,
Having seen the concert in the 80s again, closet. Now you're a teen. You're not like 13, but you're what, what were you like?
it's just turned 16, I think,
Yeah,
freshly.
mature 16. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And then you're showing a picture of yourself from that time with your new lover. And I
yeah.
just read the passage if it's here. Okay. Um, if only 16-year-old me could have seen the two men looking at the phone, this is looking at that photo, one of them a future version of himself, living a life that was completely unimaginable to him at the time, a happy version of himself 30 years later, still listening to the Tears for Fears records he so cherished, with a beautiful redheaded man yet to be born, cuddled up on the couch with him. So it's sort of, there is sort of like an intergenerational, I mean, a sense of music in the book and also your lovers. Do you want to talk about that as well? Like that sort of
Yeah. Yeah, I think, what was so funny about some of these experiences, and for whatever reason, at 45, which was 10, 11 years ago now, a lot of younger men were really interested in connecting with me, and I'll never know why, but that's just a fact. And almost every single one of them would come into my house and see my record collection, and they're just like, eyes would light up and just go, holy shit, what is this? And it's something a younger generation just doesn't understand, like the idea of having this tangible, real collection in your home. Most of these guys grew up with streaming and digital downloading, and a lot of them had never owned a record or played a record. So, that in a weird way became this way of sharing stories where I would like actually be like, well, what do you want to listen to? Or I would pick out a record. And by nature of having that thing in the room with us,
Mhm.
became a conversational tool where it was like this band really meant a lot to me when I was 15 because of these reasons. And you
Mhm.
know, as much as I like to think some of those stories are interesting, and we're all music nerds on this call, so of course we all think they're kind of interesting. I was amazed at how sort of even casual music fans were like sort of leaning up on their hand and just being like, "Tell me more. Tell me what it was like to go to a record store, what it was like to go to a concert that you couldn't watch the video or know what the playlist was in advance and know exactly what was going to happen minute to minute." So,
Yeah.
that was like I'm sharing them of this like sort of what felt like ancient history, but they were eating it up. And then they would tell me stories about their life and their experiences as young people moving through the world today. So that intergenerational thing really became a two-way share of how we tell stories to each other,
Yeah. Yeah.
fueled by the record album. Like really, that was the center of it all.
Yeah, for sure. And I love, culturally, speaking about, lining up outside Massey Hall for tickets to a
Yeah,
concert and
yeah.
how that really was, part of, I mean, for a lot of us, that was a huge part of our youth. And do you think that's changed how we experience music?
Hmm. Totally.
You're
Like,
seeing that?
I think there was such a built-in community. Like you would go to these, Tears for Fears is a great example. We slept outside. My friend actually slept outside 3 nights to make sure she was first in line. But
Yeah.
I only stayed the last night. And, you spend the whole night going up and down the
Mhm.
lineup, just meeting these people you've never seen in your entire life. And you're all kind of the same age. You're all sort of having a similar experience in your life, no matter what background or where you're going to school. And
Mhm.
it just became this really beautiful community. And then you wouldn't see each other for 6 months. And then at the concert, you'd all be looking around and be like, hey, Carolyn, oh my God, how have you been? And there's like, you had all
Yeah.
these friends that you hadn't seen in months, all because you spent a night waiting for concert tickets. It was like a
Yeah.
really special thing.
Yeah, I love the storytelling that you have and how personal your relationship to music is and how much of yourself you let in to the stories about music
Mm.
um, and it's interesting though when I'm reading it, I'm not seeing how music and I'm curious how the albums you referenced, did any of them help you come out? Like were they part of that process or are they something that just sort of leapt over that or what was the role there? Because you reference, some artists who were closeted at the time, like George Michael.
Mhm.
Freddie Mercury, Elton John, like can you speak to that a little bit? Like how they
Yeah.
might have affected or not affected your coming out?
It honestly didn't. I think like for me, music and that fandom and record collecting was really my way of escaping from my reality.
Yeah.
So it was very much a solitary experience. I spent a lot of time in my bedroom by myself with headphones on and woefully and mournfully listening to Morrissey and the Smiths. But you know, when it finally came time to come out, it just was sort of like trying to write a new chapter, I think. Like it really, like you said, all these artists that I really admired were in the closet still. Like even George Michael and Freddie Mercury and Elton John. And I was like, well, if they're not going to, you know, we all thought they were gay, but of course, but it was like, well, if they're not going to talk about it, they have agency, they have money, they have fame, they have power. I'm like this 18-year-old kid, like, no, I'm joining that party. I'm not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe young kids today have a very different experience where, you know, there's dozens of artists who are all openly and actively queer, where you could sort of look up to a role model and be like, it's going to be okay because Chapel Rowan's queer, whatever
Mhm.
artist, you know? So it's funny now that this record collection has become my way of communicating outward with the world instead of hiding, but I don't think it helped me come out.
Mm, interesting. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess, yeah, yeah, I guess I don't have anything too insightful to say about that. But I guess what I love, sorry, my train of thought, I lost my train of thought, but for a second, just sitting here, hearing you speak so articulately about your work and about music, and you've always, had such great analysis of music, and you've always, been such a great writer just in the letters that you write to us and the stories that you tell. How did you go from, I don't know if everyone knows this, but this is Pete's first book, like you are unpublished. I don't even think you had an essay published before
Yeah.
this, right?
Yeah.
So you've gone from 0 to 60 or whatever the expression is. Like, what the hell? Like, how did this start? How did you go from like not sharing your voice, being afraid of your voice,
Yeah.
sharing all this knowledge, and then these hyper personal stories that are like intensely sex
Yeah.
forward and like fucking
Yeah.
graphic. Yeah.
Um, I don't know. It just hit the wall. It was like, well, if I'm not going to do it now, when the hell am I ever going to, you know? I
Yeah.
think, you know, I will admit, like, you know, watching you and some of our very close circle of friends who are artists be so brave about sharing your queerness and storytelling and infusing your work with queerness was sort of like a bit of an eye opener of like, oh, is that okay? You can actually do that. Like that was a bit of permission. Um, there's a beautiful band called the Queer Songbook Orchestra here in Toronto, which many folks on the call may not know, but they're like a 14-piece chamber orchestra that are all queer and they rearrange mostly queer artists. And every show, there's a storytelling element where someone from the community tells a story about their life and their experience as a queer person. And then there's this beautiful orchestration of 14 to 20 people playing a song that's meaningful to that person. So they were a big inspiration for me to just sort of be like, I saw so many of their shows where I was just like crying and weeping at this sort of openness of people in front of an audience that I just sort of went, you know what, fuck it. It's my time to tell these stories. And
Yeah.
I had been so ashamed of sex and of my own queerness for so long. I just was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm just going to let it all hang out. And never imagining that Penguin Random House would publish some of the stuff that's in my book, but here we are.
I remember the first time you performed with Queer Songbook Orchestra. Had you gotten your book deal at that point? Like you were,
I think I got it, but
yes,
I couldn't technically say that I got it.
I
We
see.
hadn't papered it.
And was that the piece that was the Constant Craving, the Katie Lang piece?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, do you
right.
want to talk about that a little and that
Oh,
experience?
golly. I mean, yeah, I mean, Katie Lang is such an iconic Canadian artist, and I sort of been dating this guy Christopher for a long time. His name's different in the book, but only because there were too many Christophers. He was happy to let me use his name. But you know, Katie Lang was a huge influence on him as a queer person, and she wasn't to me, ironically. Because I think she just scared me. I was still in the closet, and I was like, she was just too queer, and I can't align myself with this person because then people might think I'm queer.
I think I was the same. I remember seeing her perform at was it the Calgary Olympics, the opening
Yeah,
ceremony,
yeah,
in her
yeah.
crew cut and her, like, was she wearing like a cowboy dress or something?
Kind of cowboy drag thing. Yeah,
And the first time I saw her in a like a bride sketch, she won a big award and Juno, I guess, and but I was like, well, I'm not her. I would like, oh, what is that gender expression? I didn't understand it, and being
yeah,
young it was hard to get past that to get into the music until you welcomed your own queerness and
yeah.
found that and realized it. But she was so sort of ahead of of um of all of that, and certainly
Totally. Yeah, she
part
pushed
of
the
it.
envelope a lot. And there was a guy in this story called Nat from the States, and he had never heard of Katie Lang. He was a younger guy, but I was still like, come on, you've never heard of Katie Lang.
Wow.
Um, and so pulled out like the Vanity Fair cover with Cindy Crawford. I found an interview that I had just seen of her and Arsenio Hall on TV talking about like sort of gender fluidity and how she's not really like she didn't say I'm not a woman, but like she was very open about not fitting in the binary and sort of representing a different female version of herself to the world. So it was
Yeah.
really fascinating. And then, this other fellow took me to the concert and I love her now. And I sort of like understand the historical context of her. I understand Ingenue a lot better than when I was younger. So I was able to write just sort of about how important she was to the queer community and some of the choices she made in her career that, really need to be honored and celebrated as queer people. And
Yeah.
then it ends with me getting a blowjob in an alley behind the concert,
As it does, as it does.
as the show goes, as the show
Yeah.
goes.
I mean, for anyone who's read the book, like certainly, I mean, obviously you are a gay man, but you're also a lesbian. Like you also
Mhm.
been welcomed into our lesbian sort of witch circles. Um,
Yeah.
you really have. And you were the one who really introduced us musically, not as an artist, but musically, to the solo work of Yoko Ono.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that. When did you get into Yoko, if we can nerd out? I know you write about it a bit in the book, but to
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely Double Fantasy was a bit of an open portal. As an adult, I made fun of it, much like many people in 1980, 81, because we just didn't understand Yoko's incredible artistry.
yeah.
But I bought Take Me to the Land of Hell, which she released when she was 80, or recorded when she was 80, one or the other. I can't remember
Oh,
exactly.
fucking good.
Yeah, and it's just this incredible record. I encourage every single person on this call to, and whoever future watches it on YouTube to like take a minute and listen to it. And I truly bought it on a whim. I either like maybe read a good review or just bought it at a record store because it was cheap, and it just blew my mind at the level of production, the musicianship, her artistry, her songwriting. It's just one of a kind, and it sort of became this mission of mine to like share it with as many people, like only the cool people who would get it. And it definitely, you guys at one of my birthday parties, there was like me and 8 lesbians just freaked out to Yoko Ono's "Take Me to the Land of Hell," which
Yeah.
is vividly described in the book, I think.
So good, so good. Um, and interestingly, though, you are also anti-diva. I think those are your words, anti-diva. Like you're not sort of a fan of, I mean, not to put Yoko in the same grouping as I'm now going off to the side. I'm sidestepping.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
you have great taste in music, and you also part of your taste is your distaste. Like you're very clear about what you like and what you don't like you went through every track on Rumors, Fleetwood Mac Rumors, and broke down why it was good or why it was bad, and then you got to Songbird and you're like, this is, I mean, I don't know what words you said, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but essentially it was like, this is worthless and skip it. And am I putting words in your mouth?
In a nutshell, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I called it worthless, but I definitely called it a skip
Monster.
track for sure.
Oh my God, you're a monster. Okay, but you are anti-diva. So is it true? I mean, I know this to be true, but I'll ask for the group. Is it true you're not into Madonna at all? You're like, no, you don't like Mariah. You're not into you're
I
a gay,
definitely
will
I
not go
have a
to war.
conflicted relationship with Madonna. I do have a lot of respect for her, especially for what she did to the queer community. And I actually think she's a pretty good songwriter. I think she's a terrible singer. I don't think she's like the artist she claims to be. But sort of like the big capital D divas like Celine and Mariah and Whitney and
Oh, geez.
Barbara, I know.
Oh,
Listen, this is
even
where our
Barbara?
music paths differ. Even Barbara, except for Guilty. I make
Hmm.
special mention for Guilty in the book. But
Okay.
yeah, I just, so much of gay culture, especially when I came out, was like 100% devoted to these divas. And I just never connected with it. I was like, for Christ's sake, can we not play some guitars or some music that like I like? And that just never seemed like an option.
Fair, fair,
So
fair, 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 fair.
yeah, I don't know. It's still true today, and I don't know. It does get me in some trouble.
I know part of I don't know if it was the mandate, but essentially for this talk was to talk about how we've influenced each other and or how artists influence each other and writers and stuff. And so yeah, I don't know when that drawing was done, but essentially we knew that you needed to write a book and that you were going to start writing a book long before Penguin Random House came along. And I
Hmm.
knew I wanted to produce an album. Like that was,
Hmm.
we're both like, we're doing this.
Yeah.
And and then lo and behold, 2019, pre-pandemic, we found ourselves at the Bat House in Bath, Ontario. And that's when you were writing. Were those were the very first essays or
Yeah, I had enough that I was trying to figure out a structure. So I probably had like, 25 essays slash chapters, some of which never made the book because it was still early work and I was trying to figure it out. Um, yeah, so I'd had enough work that it was like, okay, this is becoming something more than just a couple essays. And like you said, because I had never published anything and had no idea how to even go about it or who to contact to publish an essay, I just kept writing. Um, and
and
then,
then you'd sort of finished, I guess, the Adamant essay there, and that's when we were so the band Mints and some other artists, amazing artists, we were all sort of together over this 18 days creating music and work. And part of that process was sometimes having someone speak, speak an essay, tell a story. Alison Mitchell and on Dear Diary, different tracks where people would potentially read or freestyle lyrics, and so we'd underscore it and play along. You read an essay, one of your essays, Adam Ann, and we underscored that.
mhm.
How did that feel to do that? Because I know you were a bit nervous to get behind the mic and
Yeah. Yeah, I was terrified. It was, I'd never done anything like it before, and I was still pretty nervous about sharing any of the work that I had been writing. But I didn't spend the whole 18 days with the musicians, just to be clear. I kind of came in two chunks. But even the small time I was there, there was such a creative force happening in that building. That it felt like there was no way to say no. It was just, we all got caught up in this sweep of energy and creative sort of just magic vibes that I was just like, all right, having watched you guys just create songs from nothing off the floor, I was like, well, okay, I actually have at least a written thing. Like I have words, so I can do that. Um, but yeah, I mean, do you want to talk about it? I mean, it kind of happened just so organically that it's kind of
yeah.
remarkable.
Yeah, that was really wild. I mean, for you to do that, the original track is for everyone here is like 16 minutes. And on the
Mhm.
album, there's a 2 minute sort of excerpt or 90-second excerpt from it. But then we performed it live for your book launch, and that was with Christine Zeidler, Serena Sarin, and Selena Carroll of Mints. And so it was so exciting to go from like your essay to then recording it at the Bat House and then taking it live on stage, like the drawing, like to have that
Mhm.
realized.
Mhm.
Reading, what was it, about 8 minutes or so of the essay.
Yeah. And like, what made you want to participate? What made you want to write music to this thing I wrote?
I think there's a rhythm, like there's a certain rhythm to your writing, and I think the sexuality too of it, like when we were talking about Adam Ant and you were talking about, the drums and the percussion, and there really just is this sort of wildness about it. And so as I remember, it was like, hey Pete, do you want to read this? And so it just seemed like not obvious, but it just seemed clear that we could find something to play in. As I remember, you just said to us, whoever was in the room, you do this, you do that. I want you on
Yeah.
drums, you on percussion, and you kind of assigned us our roles. I was on sex breathing. That's my.
Yeah. You made that one up yourself. I did not
Did I
assign
make it
that role
up?
to
Okay, you didn't say
you.
sex breathing. Okay, I thought you. Okay, well, there you go. So I was on sex breathing. Anyway, it was a largely percussive kind of piece. And I
Yeah,
wish we could play it for you, the
I
90
know.
I just won't play on Zoom for some reason. But that was really exciting. And we just felt it. So part of the methodology on the album, and certainly with Mints, is feeling into a groove, getting it going, and then just letting whatever appears appear, and then the magic of editing and whatnot. But your piece just felt like a natural fit right? Because there's so
Yeah.
much memory involved, and we love working from memory as well. Like what was the
For
feel
sure.
of that time? What was the feel of that concert? What was the feel of being 13, and then cut to, 47. Um,
Yeah.
so I think, and you have I love your voice. Like you actually do narrate your own book, right? Your
Yeah, I
audiobook.
did. They let me do the audiobook, which is wild. Never
Which
thought
for the record, I can never listen to because you are my friend. Like the set, it is so graphic, the sex. Like I can read it, but like the thought of you
I mean,
reading
you heard it the first time. You don't need to hear it anyway.
it's so, but everyone who's listening to it loves it. Everyone who's listening to it absolutely loves it. I think it just might be one step too personal. Who knows?
Maybe,
Who
maybe.
knows?
But it's
I
like
don't know.
I've done some morning television interviews too, and it's, even
Yeah.
these morning hosts, these middle-aged straight women are not scandalized. They're like,
Oh,
oh, it's a bit spicy, but
I
like,
know.
they're fine.
Well, it's true because and I know for a few of us, like whenever you were telling us the stories of like the music and the sex and what was happening for you, what was wild, and you'll find this in the book, you're always just so amazed that you're having sex. Like you're always like, can someone else
Yeah,
have sex with me? And soon I'm like, okay, Pete, like this is you've got it. Like you are, like I said at the beginning, a sex magnet. Um,
still don't
but
believe
we
that.
all like lesbians who are like, tell us more. Like, and then what happened? I'm like, how do you pick up a man on the beach? Like, how does it work? Um,
That'll
so
be my next is a
yeah, I
memoir.
love
Me
the
too.
specificity of the book. Like you really don't hold back. And you don't hold back from your musical opinions. You don't hold back from any of it,
No.
uh, which is, pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's scary, but I just thought, why not? And
Yeah.
I think, Carolyn and I both talk about the Joni Mitchell story of like, I think it was Chris Christopherson telling her, like, dude, hold a piece of yourself back. Like, this album's too raw. Do not release it. And, her just saying like, well, that's just the job of the artist. Like, that's what I do. And I was like, I definitely, that was sort of in the back of my mind in some of those stories where I was just like, holy shit, am I actually going to write this down? I was like, well, Joni would.
Yeah. And I think, Pete, you've really been a beacon for us because within our circle of friends and artists and writers and musicians and people who are sort of putting out work, and we all get nervous. It's always, as all of anyone knows, when you're putting out a new piece of anything, it's absolutely terrifying and vulnerable, certainly if there is, truth and, personal, you're rooting through your own personal experiences. But what you've put out there, all of us go like, why would I ever be afraid to put anything out there? Like you, like, like you, what you managed to put on the page is so personal and so graphic and so beautiful and fun and wild and all of it that it really, we're all like, look, if Pete can do it, so can the rest of us. There's no excuse. You really did follow the fear in improv. One of the tenets of improv, I think it's Del Close who said, follow the fear. And it's, that really is it.
Yeah,
You really did do that. And look where we are.
I
I'm
know.
so proud of you.
And did that help you get over some of your own fear and terror of releasing this record finally?
No, like I'll never lose it. I'll never lose it
Yeah.
here. I'm doing it because I don't know if you guys know, but Pete has a side hustle as a creative midwife. And he just, when I was like, I don't want to put it out, I just can't put this out. It's too personal. And he's like, no, no, you have to. And so 6 years later, you pretty much sat in my living room all through the winter and
Yeah.
just do it. I'm like, oh, I have to find the art, I have to find the photos and the track. Just do it, do it. And he is an excellent creative midwife. He'll sit by your side while you go through the labor of birthing a creative project.
Yeah.
It really is a great skill of yours.
Thank you.
Yeah. So no, it didn't make it any less terrifying, but you just sort of go, okay, well, it's going to be terrifying. And I think that's what it is, right? Like if you
Yeah.
expect putting out art not to be terrifying, well, then
Yeah.
I don't know what you're doing because it's
Why
only
bother?
terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think, just think about the album and your career, like you're known as a comedian and an actor primarily, but like has music always sort of informed your work? Just,
No, actually, I mean, I know I was singing really poorly as a little girl, like all the time. All I wanted to do was make up songs and sing, and was told pretty clearly I should not be doing that. Uh, fair enough.
No.
And then at Second City, I know I was on the main stage at Second City, and one of the things that often came up in the improv sets was like make a song or whatever, and the audience gives a suggestion, and you have to make up a song. And I hated it. I was like, oh no, not this, and like everyone else would jump in and sing, and I never felt in sync or in pace with it, and I just really tanked. I wasn't good at it at all. And then it's interesting when you find your people, right? Like you find your witches or
Hmm.
base
Hmm.
experimental queer witch pop. Then if you're in the right groove, then actually you can find your voice. And when you realize your voice doesn't have to be pretty or,
Hmm.
necessarily, and that you can sort of improvise lyrics and not have them come from a comedy place, but from just a true place. And sometimes they're funny, but sometimes they're just tapped into the moment that becomes really exciting. So no, for me, it took a long time to say it's okay to play music. It's okay to jam with people. It's okay to
Hmm.
not be super skilled, like to stay on like one string in the truth or a couple of strings in
Yeah.
the truth. It's just to be able to listen. And I think it's when that clicked that music, certainly playing it is about listening and a conversation that's happening between different people as they play. I think something cracked open, but no, it is something I pushed away for a long, long,
Mm.
long, long, long time.
And yet you still wrote and created an entire television show around one song.
Yeah. Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's a little different because I'm not behind the mic. But yeah, for anyone who doesn't know the Whitney Houston song, I Have Nothing. Yeah, I was listening to it whenever a few years back, and I was like, oh, this needs to be a full-length professional pairs gold level figure skating routine.
Yeah.
And I'll choreograph professionals or gold medalists to it. And that became the thesis and the thrust of the show. So
Yeah.
yes, music has certainly played a role, but I mean, creating music, is certainly following where music leads always. Like music has led
Always.
me all sorts of places as it has you,
Yeah.
creative and otherwise. But creating it is a particular form of terror.
And that was another idea or like routine you had where both of us were like, this is going to be a television show one day. Like there was just a certainty that
Yeah.
that would happen. And
Yes.
you witched that from an insane idea into a television show.
And there you go.
It's
I don't know
admirable.
which magic is afoot, I think. I
Yeah.
don't know if there are other sort of witchy people on this call. No, I don't know. No pressure.
Show
Okay.
yourself.
But I'm sure there's other people who have questions. I mean, these are now we're just sort of, is it time? Are we moving over to
Yeah, I
Q&A?
think we have a fair amount of questions that we could start
Yeah.
asking, and then people, there's still time to add your questions, so don't be shy. But the first question is actually by Alex about record stores.
Yeah.
Yeah, y'all were starting to talk about it, and I was just sort of curious to hear a bit more about like what records shops kind of helped create your collection or like gave you a sense of community. I'm wearing Cactus Records, which is a record store in Houston, where I'm from. And I always think about my records in relation to where I got them. Not
Totally.
all of the records, but I do have like kind of fond memories of certain record shops as I've at the various places I've lived over the years. So I'm just kind of curious to hear more about like the stores that you frequented and if any of them are still around.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Toronto, as you said earlier, and Yonge Street, that sort of splits the city in half, was like the golden mile of record stores when I was a kid. Like just dozens of them. So you could get off the subway at Bloor Street, walk to Queen Street, and go to like 15 different record stores. And so like there were tons. I remember still like you could actually smoke cigarettes in the record store, and I remember like I would just hang out with my buddy and I remember my friend Michelle one time like, "Oh, I heard this great record on the weekend," and like she just started singing it to a salesperson, and he was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, here it is." So like those kinds of experiences I think are lost today for sure. But
Yeah.
there's Sam the Record Man was a big one in Toronto. There was Cheapies, which had like all the cool 12-inch single imports from the UK. And then there was this amazing store that is long gone, but called Vortex. It was sort of like all used stuff, and you could buy like $2, $3 for stuff that someone had just thrown into the bin. It was brand new. It was an amazing store. Um, but in Toronto, probably like they're sort of going by the dinosaur, but there's one, Rotate This is probably still my favorite. They're like the best priced and they're just kind of the coolest. Yeah, so they're I still feel like there's such an important way to learn about music. I've bought records because I hear them played in the store, or there's a Savannah at the store knows me really well. She's like, "Oh, this came in. I think you'd like it," and it's sort of like that's so much nicer than an algorithm trying to force whatever track down me.
And there's really something about the inherited collection too, right? Like that's such a big
Yeah.
part of having vinyl. Like, yes, you're in the stores and going through the crates, but it's like when your sister, your uncle, whoever is like, here, you can have my collection. Or, a friend gave me all her Joan Armatrading. I was like, are you kidding me? Like that can happen. And so it's so fun when you have, did you inherit any in your?
Me? Yeah, a couple for sure. A friend of my dad's, I have some of my dad's. He had not the best taste in music, but I've still got some of his like Ella Fitzgerald records and Dinah Washington that I get to spin, and those feel pretty special. And a friend of his gave me like this mountain of stuff, and he has good stuff, but he's gonna hold on to it. I'm like, come on, Phil. So I know there's more coming, but I keep waiting for Phil.
Next, we have Andrew talking about the nature of your project, or Drew talking about the nature of your project being a hybrid of memoir.
Yeah, first, thanks so much for this conversation. It's like giving me life after a long day of teaching. Something that I want to hear more about, Pete, was kind of what Penguin thought about this hybrid project from the start, like this memoir meets music history. Was this something that made sense to them from the jump? Was it something that required a lot of convincing on your part? Like, what did that interaction look like?
Yeah, interesting. I went to my very first meeting and I, was scared out of my mind. You're going to the head office of Penguin Random House. And I'm in a room that's just like wallpapered with all the classic covers of Penguin books. I'm like, holy shit. But they asked me like, what's your book about? And it just kind of clicked and they were like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And they just kept asking questions. And it's like, they'd read samples. There's a Kate Bush story and an Adam Ant story that I'd sent them. So they kind of got how those things worked. But right away they were just into it. And they said like, how much have you written? And like, I pulled out the 110,000 word manuscript and they were like, oh shit. Okay. And so they took that and just that's it. There was no pushback. Even the sexual content, they were like, "This is great. It makes the book. It's honest. It's real. It's raw." And I thought, especially a publisher like that would have pushed back on that, but no, they got it right away. Surprisingly. And thank you. I'm glad we gave you life, Andrew.
Thank you.
Marin had a question about lyrics. Did you want to ask that, Marin?
Sure. And first of all, thanks so much for this talk. This is amazing. I'm not on camera because I literally had a hip replacement this morning.
Oh no.
No, it's good. It's my second one at Sunnybrook. It's all good. I'm in Toronto convalescing. I'm on morphine, having the best time ever. This is just a practical question. Because I know writing 33 and thirds, you can't quote lyrics. Is that sort of something across the board? It's that's a boring question because it's yes or no. But if the answer is no, how did you get around it? Or if the answer is yes, how did you do that? Because I've only listened to the audio introduction so far. I'm so sorry.
No problem. I stripped it all. There was a version of the book where I was actually referencing lyrics and using it really as mood and really to reinforce my own sort of emotional state. And Penguin was just like, forget it. We're just not going to bat for this. They're like, if you want to clear all these lyrics, great.
Right.
I was like, I don't know how to do that. So I kind of gave up. But funnily though, Marin, in the 33 and a third, they were like, yeah, fair use lyrics. You can use this much. And I was like, okay. So I don't know. I might get sued when that thing comes out, but I just followed their lead.
Can you remind me what I think I know, but what are you writing the 33 and the third again? I'm on a lot of meds.
Yeah, great. Enjoy those. Yeah, it's a great ride. I've had two hip replacements, so I know where you're at. Yeah.
This is my second, so here we are.
Yeah, and look at me. You'll be healed in no time.
Yes.
B-52's Cosmic Thing, and really looking in that as a celebration of queer joy in the face of losing Ricky Wilson to AIDS and the crazy political climate of the time.
So they're letting you use, or they're letting you attempt to use some lyrics in your 33 and third, but Penguin said just don't do it.
Penguin just said forget about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, were you so you were just pulling things, or did you find like this is obviously I'm asking more because I'm writing some similar stuff. So did you like find ways around it? Did you have any techniques, or did you just like cut the passages and start again with when you took the
Yeah,
lyric?
I cut them and sort of like rewrote in a way that references the lyric without actually using the lyric, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, and thanks for the
Yeah.
wonderful book.
Yeah, thanks, Maren. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And then I think I'm up next, and I just had a question about music, sharing music as a means for breaking barriers across age because it enabled you to connect with your younger lovers and across gender with your lesbian friends. Do you have any thoughts about why sharing music allows you to move across groups, categories?
Yeah, I think for me personally, it's that place where I open up the most and like I think I become most alive is when I'm listening and talking and sharing music. So I think that's partly for me why it opens up a door to me to many different people and different relationships. I do think it's just a great leveler in a lot of ways. It's even if you don't necessarily like you're in different points in your life, you're starting your career, you're ending your career, but it's like you get to be like, listen to that fucking cool bass line. Like there's still sort of like just something in that that's so easy to share and so easy to talk about that I don't know, it worked for me. I don't know if it's true of everyone, but I don't know, Carolyn, what do you think? As one of my lesbian friends I share music with all the time, does it make you think, oh, that guy's cool, or I want to learn from him, or
I was like, that guy's cool.
yeah,
No, yeah, for sure. It always makes me think some guy's cool. No, yeah, no, for sure. Yes, yes. And absolutely, even when you can relate on, yeah, like you said, a bass line or a piano line or whatever it is, a way into it, a lyric, a history. And I find it's what it meant to the person. Like, we were talking about inheriting vinyl, and my Uncle Clive had this beautiful vinyl collection. And as he was getting older and knowing he was, going to go into a nursing home and whatnot, he was saying, okay, you can have this. And he was introducing me to the albums, but it's not just the album. He'd say, like, I remember Hot Buttered Soul, Isaac Hayes. He's like, oh, and he didn't want to part with it. He's like, well, I guess. And then he said, and he knew I was gay, lesbian. He's like, okay, so you like girls? So I was like, yeah. And he goes, and you smoke pot sometimes? Like he had certain things he wanted to know before he was going to give me this album to listen to it. And so there was this bond with my, 80-year-old uncle, testing me to see if I was worthy of, his collection. So I have his like original Joni Mitchell Blue and Neil Young Harvest. And to know these people who I never would have thought were, listening to having a life beyond, the life that you see them as, older folks, to just remember that they were young once. Yeah.
Thank you. Carl, you had a question?
Yeah. It's so great to have both of you here, Pete and Carolyn, in our little series. And congratulations, Pete and Carolyn. I'm a fan for a long time, so it's great to have you here. I wanted to ask Pete about your relationship to music writing, which is something that
yeah,
hasn't come up so far in the
yeah.
conversation. As a listener, as a fan, were you an avid music writing reader growing up, or at some point did that begin? And what are the influences on that level on this writing, or
Hmm.
are the models from other places?
Yeah, great question, actually. I definitely, as a kid, I don't think I had a subscription to Rolling Stone, but I bought it religiously. Like that was one of the major sources of information for me for music. So, you know, I don't think I could name writers or specific people that I was influenced by, but that definitely was a totem for sure of cool for me. Um, you know, I, I read a handful of 33 and a thirds. I'm a regular biography reader of musicians I love and have quite a significant collection there. So I think of all the influences, that would probably be it. And I think, as I think through some of the individual stories in the book, like I'm definitely treating it as a biographical journey where it's sort of like a short form version of some of their careers and high notes and how it sort of intersected with my life. But I think what I took is that idea of biography, but blending where it meets queer theory for me, which feels like a sort of new space. I'm sure there's academic writing in the field that I've never read, but in a popular space, it feels new to me, that kind of blend of things. And that's very much what the B-52's book is all about, too.
Mhm.
I think Drew had another question about the structure of the book. Andrew, I keep calling you Drew. I am sorry. That's not what your name says. Andrew, yeah, this question about the structure of the book.
Sure. Yeah, no, Drew's all right, just not Andy. That would be the preference. I think that, yeah, structure-wise, something that kind of leapt out to me, Pete, was like each chapter drawing inspiration from a song. And
Mhm.
so I was curious, like when you arrived at that format, like how did that come about? Was that something that developed later? And then how might that impact like the reader experience of the book versus something that moves chronologically or along some other type of line?
Yeah, interesting. There was the very first version of the book I handed in was actually called My Mixtape. And I played around with conventions of like a fast forward and a rewind to like really just help the reader along in a super clear way. And it actually turned out it just didn't work. And Penguin was like, it's not working, so forget about it. There were definitely chapters that weren't song titles or an album title that I don't know. I think I was just like more mood setting ideas or like introducing a character name. But it was my editor who was like, Pete, like song titles, stick to the song titles. So, half of them were already a song title or an album title. So those were easy. And then others were like, helping more set the mood. So, some of them you may not even actually get a reference to the song in the particular chapter, but it's like, to me, it's like sort of a mood setter or like a vibe to help you into the emotional space of that chapter.
Thanks.
Yeah, pleasure.
And then Steez has a question about the comparative pleasures of listening to music and some other things.
Mm.
I've had a very long day, so I'm not going to show you my face. Um, but I'm really curious, also thinking about Toronto and having that day where you'd go to the record shop and then you'd go to the bookstore and then you'd go to the tub and then you'd go to the bar and then it had this really perfect kind of quotidian moment of pleasure. And that kind of seems to have disappeared. So I'm curious about the kind of queer potential of that culture seeking, all encompassing wise. That doesn't sound like a question, but if you put a question mark on the end of it, it becomes a question.
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of information in there. I think, yeah, I think it just happens in living rooms now, and I think that's, instead of going on that journey for a long day, someone would just come to my house and I'd be like, here's a cool book, here's a cool album, let's have sex and then have a drink. Like it all sort of happened within a much tighter capsule, I think. Um, I don't think that's good or bad, but I think that's sort of the best sort of way I could explain it happening in my life or in this modern world today.
And I think Carl has the last question about place, relationship to the new wave scene in Toronto.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess in the anecdotes that have come up, I haven't had a chance to read the book yet, so I don't know what else might come up. But talking about sort of your 80s and your relationship to discovering, projecting, fearing queer content in the pop music that you were hearing.
Mhm.
Um, I wondered about your relationship to the local scene in that period, and that there was, a thriving new wave scene here and, centered around Queen West. And it was a pretty
Mhm.
queer scene, like Rough Trade and Parachute Club being the sort of touchstones that come to mind first. And so I
Yeah.
wonder if that stuff had an influence on you when you were young, or if it seemed to inaccessible. And for Carolyn, you can chime in on this too, for both of you.
Yeah, I think subconsciously it probably played a little part. I was too young to be there. Like I just wasn't old enough to be at club seeing Parachute Club or Rough Trade, but like I like those are two miracles of early 80s in, I know we have a lot of Americans, but they were both led by queer women and had big hit songs in Canada in the early 80s. So really an outlier in the musical world. But definitely, I spent a ton of time in Queen West, sort of in the later 80s, early 90s, when it was sort of like the Bourbon Tabernacle Choir and the Phantoms and the Sidemen, which is much straighter in a weird way. So I think that's part of the snapback from HIV/AIDS was like, and I talk about that in the book too. I think it happened in the UK where all these like cool queer bands were happening. And then all of a sudden AIDS happened, and that's just like no one was queer anymore, like just no one. And I think that's sort of what Queen West became for me. Still great music, still great influence by the art scene, but it didn't have that sense of queerness to me.
Yeah,
And
and
you
I
were
was
in
in
Montreal to
Montreal.
something, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and I came out later. So yeah, it's an interesting question. Though I do remember being young in Montreal and my best friend's dad was really into Me Mom and Morgenthaler and really into like punk scene. And it made me think of that when you were in the chapter Rise Up, where you were talking about going to the rallies and stuff and meeting Morgenthaler. But that was like my educate, like it was wild. It was like, who's that? And why is this important? And yeah. Hmm. But I
That
love.
was the, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, that was the last question that I saw in the chat, but I actually wanted to ask another question if no one else has another question. Because one of the things you talk about in the description of the book was about HIV/AIDS, and I don't hear enough conversation about HIV/AIDS and music. Would you mind sharing a little bit about how your music listening and collecting had to do with your experience of AIDS in the 80s and 90s?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much a response to my own fear of that. So I just, instead of actually becoming a queer person and going out into the world, I collected records. Um, and there is a bigger book and I think a bigger conversation around what HIV and AIDS did to the popular music all over the world, because boy, did it turn. And I do talk a little bit about that in the B-52's book, but, because all of a sudden, like, these just really weird, exaggerated versions of masculinity, mostly defined by like hair metal bands and sort of this just crazy stuff, became popular as opposed to like, Bronski Beat or Frankie Goes to Hollywood, who were wearing their queerness a little bit more overtly. Um, yeah, I just went down a tunnel there. I didn't really answer your question, but I wasn't actively thinking about it like, oh, I want to support queer artists, or I wish this album was addressing the HIV/AIDS crisis, or expecting artists to do so. I was sort of happy to just bury my head in the sand and not think about it. But I do think there's a real opportunity for someone to take a look at that really closely.